Um, okay, it's 5:03 now, so I think we're going to get started. Okay, hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Sophia. I'm the Director of Planning and Events for the Civil Engineering Society, and this is the second series in our industry talk. So one of our subcommittee members, Olivia, has been working really hard to organize this. So I'm going to hand over to her now. With, if you've already filled in the form, you're okay. But if you haven't, please fill it in. But apparently we've been having some issues with that. So we're going to look into it and hopefully sort it out. Olivia, do you want to take over?
Yep. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second interview of the Industry Talk series. This is the second of the 4 interviews that you must attend in order to receive those 10 engineering PEP hours. And then there will be a quick feedback form at the end of the last seminar to fill out. If you have any questions throughout the interview, please send them in the chat, and it is recommended to take down some notes. So if everyone could please turn on their camera to make Grant feel more welcome, that would be greatly appreciated. Our first guest speaker today is Grant Roe. So welcome, Grant. Grant is the Managing Director at Costin Roe Consulting. He specializes in structural and civil engineering in industrial, commercial, residential, community and infrastructure developments and forensic reporting. He has a master's degree in engineering and a master's degree in business administration. Unfortunately, our second guest speaker had an issue arise, so he won't be attending. But welcome, Grant. I'll just give a little introduction about your company. So Costin Roe Consulting is a firm of civil and structural engineers working in commercial, industrial, residential, community, infrastructure and event-related engineering and project management. They have offices in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Newcastle and Wollongong. The company was established in 1989 as Costin Structural and then later gained a civil sector in 2001 and was renamed Costin Roe Consulting. So as a bit of an introduction question, what does the field of structural look like in the workplace, and what sort of projects or tasks do you work on in a day-to-day life?
Well, thanks, Olivia, for the introduction and the background information. That was good, and thanks for having me along. Look, engineering in the workplace it's an evolving thing, but as a consultant, we describe the workplace of working mostly in an office doing design, and we spend then time on the site. We have quite a lot of engagement with the design team as a whole. We certainly don't work in isolation. We're actively engaged with a range of other consultants, project managers and the client, and the more that engagement occurs, the better the result the project is. And these days, there's a lot of tendency with the design and construct builder to have very early engagement with the builder, which is useful because quite often there's many ways to approach a project from construction, which influence the design. So we're working in a fairly large team of people. We're working in an office. We're doing design, which is putting probably into practice a lot of the information and learning that you're doing now, coming into practice and design, and then we're taking it in, documenting it and taking it into the field.
Yeah.
So we'll spend time out of the office on projects, getting our hands a little bit dirty as well. But designers probably have the advantage that we can walk away from the construction site and get back into a nice air-conditioned office where life's a little bit easier.
Yeah, for sure. So I just had some questions about your earlier life in the workplace. So you started working for the Sydney Water Board, and then you're an assistant engineer for Pioneer's asphalt and concrete sectors, undertaking quality control laboratory work. What made you then switch into a structural design and followed by a management role within Costin Roe?
It's probably a bit of an evolution of a career. I mean, when I first worked with Sydney Water Board, I was completing my engineering course, and we had that was at UTS up the road from you guys, and at that stage it was called the Institute of Technology. My course was structured as a sandwich course where I studied for 6 months full time and then spent the remainder of the year working full time. So I initially worked for what was called the Water Board, and spent time in there. And it was really, the way I fell into that job was, at that time there was a fairly significant downturn in construction industry, and getting work was difficult. But Sydney Water offered a mini cadetship program for students at UTS, and I took that up, and I spent time in there with basically hydraulics, mostly hydraulics or water supply design. And we spent a lot of time checking supply systems for making sure there's enough water to feed to fight fires. It was quite interesting work at the time. Following that, I then joined Pioneer Concrete, and I did work in asphalt and concrete and quarries, again during my course in the sandwich structure. And I spent a lot of, it was a very valuable experience for me, but it was mainly working in quarries. I learned a lot about explosives. I had opportunity of mixing up explosives. Quite interesting work when you're a young engineer, making things blow up. It was quite enjoyable. I spent time in the lab, as you said, quality control. The good thing about that, I learned a lot about hands-on experience working with some tough guys in some pretty hard conditions. It was all good experience. I then finished my course. I worked with, in what's missing in there, I spent some time with Shell in their, what they call their downstream environment, which was from the refinery out to distributing fuel at service stations. We were building a couple of service stations and working in the refinery. So it was from what Shell calls downstream, is from the refinery to the car for fuel. I then had this opportunity to join Costin Roe, which was a newly established firm, and it was a bit of a change because I hadn't done any design, and I went straight into design. And it was quite a bit of a flip in my approach, because I think most people tend to either go down a design or a project management role, and that I've decided design would be interesting. I gave it a go and haven't looked back. So since then, I've managed to become a partner of this business and grow it successfully to where it is today. When I joined, we were about 4 people, and now we're nearly 40 and probably heading towards 50 towards the end of this year. So it's a bit of an exciting time, and we've come, specialists in civil and structural design, which was it's quite a rewarding experience.
Yeah. And what made you get into management after structural design?
It's interesting where the evolution of management sort of comes, and I think most of us will find us, as for our career, as we become more experienced and more senior, that you naturally end up into a management role because you need to start to look after people. And partly, you mentioned that I've completed a MBA. Part of that was to learn, as engineers, we get trained for a lot of technical aspects, which is important for our engineering career.
Yeah.
But engineers are not trained, there's no time. So you need to learn management skills, which is broadening our experience. So we go from learning about design or engineering, and then learn about people, management, finance. These are all the tools we need to manage a team in our office initially, get a design team working, because then you've got people working for you. We need to get the most engaged people and nurture them to get the most out of them. So it's a natural progression. We will all find this happen to us over our career. Ultimately, I'll become a partner of this business. So then I need to manage the business. So in a consulting role, as I am as a consulting engineer, we are still experts. We have knowledge. And what happens, you have you develop intuition and gut feel about what the answer is, and you almost know what the solution could be without even doing any work.
Yeah.
Then you need a team of people behind you to get down there and do the little detail, calculate out the hard numbers, and that's where the 2 aspects. And it's people that will stay with that. There's people who love the detail and computer modelling. These days, we're building complex finite element computer models, and I probably couldn't even do that. But what's important is that I need to know I almost need to know what the answer is beforehand, but I do need a team of people that we have to manage to get to that point. So the management is a natural evolution, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's also something that we're not really exposed to at uni, so it's good to get an aspect of management.
There's no time, Olivia. You've got to think about, you've got a lot to learn in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
You can only crunch in, and even from the engineering design or whatever area you want to go in, there's a limit to the time a course can provide you, but it's always adds to your knowledge. As you work, you start to apply that.
For sure.
And then eventually you'll find yourself dealing in a team of 4 or 5 people, and someone will naturally come to lead those people. You need to complement those skills. You'll find in your future career, you'll finish this course, but to be successful in the longer term, you'll need to do more study, as much, back to uni, whatever. Sounds bad, but it's not. It actually is good. Part-time course, and when you do a Master of Engineering Science, do a Master of Business Administration, all build your knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. So the next question is, previously the company was well known for their structural design on major industrial projects. The business has since grown, but in relation to civil design, how did the company make the transition from structural and then to gaining a civil sector?
It's another good question, and it's interesting because we were initially structural only, but it became natural. I think I mentioned, started to develop quite a specialisation in industrial, which is basically warehousing and manufacturing sector, food processing. It became natural to complement that with the civil offering, and civil engineering in that sense was doing earthworks. These are big projects. You might have a site which is 50, 100,000 square meters. We have to move a lot of dirt around. We need to get stormwater drainage working. We need to build pavements. So it made sense for us to offer civil engineering in conjunction with the structural engineering to package it up. So that was really the initial move. I joined the firm. I had a bit of an interest in civil engineering. So I said, no, we can do this. We can package it together and offer both civil and structural engineering. And since then, over the life of the firm, we've grown that and even have now the civil and structural, almost separate components of the business, but we are working together on the same projects. And it means our client doesn't have to talk to 2 engineers for civil structural, and they fit closely together. So it was almost a natural thing. You'll see some engineering firms then might add in hydraulics, such as sewer and water supply. We elected not to do that. We stick with the civil. We're now, civil engineering wise, we're doing quite significant large industrial subdivisions in the west of Sydney, around the airport area out there. There's you'll see these large expanses of sheds. We've sort of been involved in turning paddocks into ground that can be useful for a shed, and then we'll stick the building on top of it.
So would you say your civil sector's growing almost bigger than structural now?
It's probably much the same. It's very, the business turnover is pretty much the same, equal. It's gone from 1 or 2 people up to, it's probably 11, 12 guys plus the documentation guys. The interesting about civil engineering, you tend to have the design and documentation done by the designer, which is particularly with the tools that the software and the documentation tools these days, whereas structural still tends to have a separate drafting role. But to answer your question, I would say it's still fairly equal. It's grown to be equal in the business. And that's probably the nature of the projects we're working on, because we tend to do both together.
Yeah, well, that's sort of what you want. Yeah, exactly. And then there's another follow-up question. Where do you see your business growing in the future? And
that's something I try to have an answer to every day, and it changes every day. But it's like you see opportunities, and as a business owner, you want to pursue them. But what I see in Australia for us, the biggest growth is the industrial, what I call industrial, which is the building, warehousing, logistics, distribution centres. For us, that is a big growth area for us. We've become specialists in the industrial area. And some people say, oh, warehouses are just not very interesting. But in fact, they've become very interesting. So, and it's evolved significantly because of the way warehousing and logistics has changed. And there's a significant amount of automation. Everyone wants their items sent to their house in record time. We just recently worked with Amazon on a multi-level warehouse in Western Sydney, which, I think of these warehouses, they're 80,000 square metres in plan, and there's 4 levels of it, where when I started, we were doing 5,000 square metre shed. So we've gone from what was a tin shed into a very sophisticated multi-level facility, and the requirement for expert engineering has increased because these floors are not allowed to deflect very much. The strength requirement is high. The performance to support the automation is much more sophisticated. So for us, our experience in that has meant we've become experts in it, and there's not many people who do it. So we see that as a very important growth path for us.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. As another question, the majority of our civil engineering students at Sydney have to pick a major by year 3. So why did you choose to do like structural/civil? And what tips do you have for students wanting to major in these streams?
It's a good question, because I reflect on that, and at the time, it's almost flipping a coin to pick, for me, civil or structural. It was at UTS, when I went there, we could choose either structural specialisation or civil.
Yeah.
I chose civil because it was a little bit broader, because we included some structural subjects. And I didn't want to. Structural was more of a specialisation, the way the course was structured, so I wanted to stay a little bit broader. Now, where I've went to, I've sort of now turned more into my role in this business is more structural. My business partner looks after civil. That's just how things evolve. My advice is not to think too long about it. It's about not so much flip a coin, but look at the subjects that you're doing and make sure you're interested in them, because the interest will keep you focused, which is important. And don't worry too much if the choice is going to be wrong, because it won't be wrong. Because when you finish, it doesn't really matter, because if you did civil, structural, or even if you did some mechanical, in the end, you finish the course. That's what's important. And then you'll choose a career and start a career, and then you will take 3 or 4 years before you really settle in what direction you're going to go. And then you're going to have to do more. That's when you start to focus the path. It's 3 or 4 years after you graduate, and then you'll start specialising in structural, or you may go down the civil path. And that's when your career will take direction, because you want to try a little bit of both. And personally, I thought the civil gave me that, but I ended up being a structural engineer. So
well, there you go.
don't worry too much. Just pick something that keeps you interested.
Yeah.
And do well in it.
That's some good advice. So next question is, if you were looking to hire, what do you personally look for in an employee?
And I'm always looking to hire, and employing people is one of the biggest challenges I have as managing a business, because you've got to fit a person in who has knowledge, technical knowledge, and also works with people. But when we look, we employ young engineers in their last course as interns, and also just young graduates. But what the most important thing we look for an engineer is a couple of things. And one is, I'm not necessarily looking for someone who's got straight high distinctions. I mean, what we're looking for is a good, consistent result. And if someone has, credit distinction average consistently, that to me shows that demonstrates that they're the good, consistent, working, dedicated to the project. So that's important to us. Then we like to see, and it becomes down to gut feel, is a bit of enthusiasm, and tenacity, some other little things on the side they might be doing, which shows they've got a bit of rounded personality, but interested. What do you guys do here, organising this SUCE and that, and running that on top of a course, is a good indicator to us as employers that he's a person who can handle something else, do it, organise it, and do it well. All these things go into a bit of a mixing pot, and presentation at an interview is good because you do make a decision quite quickly on a person, and arriving a bit enthusiastic, on time, look like you're interested, and have good consistent results in the course, and then we go from there.
Yeah, bit of a mix of everything. There was also a question in the chat that sort of linked to this. So if you were to hire engineers for your team, would a candidate be more desirable if they had a degree in project management, or like if they were a double degree student? Would that make a difference?
It does make a difference in the sense that they've got a bit more broader background and training. And having a project management training as well as engineering, it just broadens the experience that the individual has, that they can offer to the employer. And I think it's important. The project management, again, is another specialised field, and you'd find that if someone's interested in project management, you're sort of taking a step away from design. So that's why it's not absolutely necessary to us. But for a project management firm, a project manager with an engineering degree double would be very attractive, because their project managers need to understand how the engineering works. But we've employed, for example, architects who've changed to engineers, and someone who's done an architectural degree and then an engineering degree. And some people have started an architecture degree and changed to engineering. We did have someone who once did project management but turned straight into engineering. So it's not a jump out thing, but it certainly tells you something about an individual in handling some challenging roles. The thing in consulting, and I should add, you need to be able to work on multiple things at the same time. It's not the job we do doesn't mean you just do one task and for 1 week and then go do something else. In consulting offices, consulting engineers, you'll be working on 4 or 5 things at once. You'll have someone ring you up, interrupt what you're doing, you'll go do that, then you need to be able to come back and pick up exactly where you left off and start again. You'll have people chasing you in the morning for drawings and giving you a new job 10 minutes later. So things are very dynamic. The ability for someone to handle multiple threads and multiple situations is very important. It's a skill that is developed partially you can see in university environment, because you have multiple courses and subjects going on. You'll have an exam one day and have to flip to the next subject the next. That skill is vital in consulting engineering, and maybe in other fields, but certainly something we look forward to.
Another question that we had from our Google Forms before the event is, what kind of people would consulting engineering be more suited for compared to a direct structural or civil engineer?
Well, sorry, the question is about comparing consulting engineering to a direct civil structural?
So
I might take that as saying, well, consulting is design versus someone who may be managing on site. The difference, the primary difference in my role, let's talk about how our office works. We're really a design role. So in here, we're applying the science of engineering to design. We need to understand codes. We need to look at loads. We need to understand structural performance, or civil. We need to understand pipes, water flow, earthworks. Design then turns that science application of engineering into documents, and our role then sort of starts to drop off. If you're an engineer on a construction site, you're not design, but you're taking a design and saying, how do I build this? Now that is a bit of a mixture thing, because you actually physically have to take something from paper to reality. Now designers, sometimes we need to, as designers, need to understand that things have to be built, but someone has to bridge that gap to how am I going to get a 10-story building up, or a warehouse across a beam that spans 50 meters in the air, and not have the whole thing fall down while it's being built. So it's a different application, different work. In design, we sometimes can be seen as being a little bit abstract with less practical application, whereas construction is practical, but they need to understand why a designer has come up with a certain design.
Yeah.
And there's a role there to blend the two together, because there can be a gap, and it's just a different requirements. Design, you're going to spend your life more in an office. Construction, you're going to be on a site. You'll be out. Some people, and it's a job. You can. I did that at uni. You're on the site, in the dirt, in the mud, getting your hands dirty. Design, we can be sitting in the office, but we do need to get out to realise that what we design has to work.
Yeah.
Less of that. And I'll just, is that sort of answering that question, do you think? Or
Yeah, no, it definitely does. There's definitely like different personality types that sort of fit into each.
it's different personality, you're right, but you go back, things change too, Olivia, because 5 years ago, or even only 5 to 10 years ago, construction sites were rough, tough, hard environments.
Yeah.
And office would be a little bit more softer environment, let's say. But it is things change, and society's values change as well. And construction sites are becoming more diverse. And you go back when I started my engineering career, there was very few women involved, and construction sites weren't a great environment for women. That has changed significantly as well, driven by, thankfully, some of the larger builders who've driven that through and made it happen. In design, you would have seen more women. So things change.
Yeah.
So it's not as rough as it used to be, but it's still it's a tougher environment on site. You could be working, starting on a construction site at 6 o'clock in the morning, whereas you might be starting in a design office at 8. So it's a little bit different. But in a design office, you mightn't finish to 6 at night. In construction, you hopefully out the door before it gets dark.
For sure. We had another question from the Google Forms. So what are some common issues that you face when working on an engineering project, and what steps do you take to resolve it?
Well, it's an interesting question, because some of the bigger issues are not even related to design. And one of probably the most common issue that we are confronted with is the cost of the design. So it's a matter to keep, what is a very competitive environment. If we're working for design and construct builders, is we are required to work at the very pointy ends and do very fine and finely tuned design to get a very low cost, the best you can get for the design problem that exists.
Yeah.
There's a constant challenge. And then the next problem that arises that is just, no one's perfect. We're designers, and if you make some mistake, the biggest problem is the mistake costs someone money, and the builder, your client, and that is a big challenge to unravel. The design problems on the whole can be fairly straightforward, but there are a lot of challenges in design which you never really know till you get there. And with the way industrial's moving with more sophistication, linking in automated systems into buildings, there's very specific design challenges, and we've had to push to the edge of design. We're trying to build floors now that support racking systems, which might be 40 meters high, and trying to keep the movement down to less than a millimeter, which is very challenging. And these design problems are difficult, but they offer opportunities. I've been traveling all around Europe and China and Asia, exploring and investigating these things, which is good fun as well. You can have a bit of fun with this and dealing with the designers of these systems so we can get the best solution here, and making these things work. And the tools available to us these days with the analysis have become much better. Computer, obviously, technologies have changed, and these design challenges can be resolved. So there's a bit of everything there. But everyday cost becomes a big headache for us.
Yeah, I bet. Also, just with COVID, how has your company adapted to that? Like, I know the construction industry at the moment is sort of going into a bit of a boom after COVID, but during COVID, what were some of the things that you did to ensure
COVID was quite interesting. Yeah, COVID was quite an interesting challenge for us all. The COVID did result in a bit of a rethink of how we work. Mainly, we work from home for some time. Initially, this time last year, I think we started it. It created a lot of uncertainty for people. It was much of a challenge for me in managing an office of 30, 40 people who everyone didn't know what was going to happen. But like you said, construction was fortunate because it was not affected so much by the shutdowns because it was more essential. So it turned into business as usual for us, with probably a lot of work at home initially, then a gradual drift back to the office in some reconfiguration. Fortunately, the technology had finally caught up, enabling us to work remotely. So people were able to work at home with VPN networks, and we were adaptable to that. We already had people working at home, so it wasn't, for us, it wasn't difficult. We sort of had flexibility built in there, but not for the whole office. So we had to suddenly adapt the whole office so the whole office could be out, and then maybe half the office. And now we've got nearly everyone's back except for one or two people who live a bit further away. So the technology's proven itself quite well. These sort of meetings, I'm worn out with Teams and Zoom meetings because that seems to be but it's good because if we can have a Teams meeting from some projects, it can be very effective in saving us time.
Yeah.
COVID was interesting because we didn't affect our business because construction was protected. Australia is in a very fortunate position compared to the rest of the world, but it did adapt the way we work a little bit.
Yeah, I bet.
Probably your experience. I mean, you obviously had lectures at home, and which would be a challenge, I think, but I think we were less affected than that.
That's good to hear. There's also another question in the chat. Hi Grant, are there any recommended extracurricular activities that you would recommend that would make us more employable at Costin Roe?
Well, it's a good question because it's the top of my head. It's hard to just pick them, but what I do see is involvement in this sort of activity is a good example. Involvement in sport is also a good activity, but involvement in organising these little extra bits, some community give back here and there, is the sort of thing that jumps out in a CV. Because this, and I talk about the SUCE because it is a good example of an activity that's associated with what you're doing there. There's commitment and work to do that, but it also benefits the entire university community. And I got involved when I was at university with the Students Association, which I think what do you call it at Sydney? I can't think what you call it at Sydney, but so with the Students Association, and I got on the committee. I was got voted on as the secretary, and it was interesting because you get involved in all the politics. Young Labor, Young Liberal. And I got a bit involved with Young Labor. It's quite interesting, but it was quite a good experience to sit on a committee, and we similar to what you're doing here, we were running a students association who provided services to our members.
Yeah.
So that's sort of, I mean, sometimes it's hard fitting this into your life, but it's quite, I think it's important to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So everyone join SUCE.
Well, that's a good start.
Thank you. So next question is, what has changed the most within the industry throughout your career life, which I think you touched on a bit before, and how has this influenced your role?
The big things that jump out is I'll put them in a couple of areas, is the technology and in the ability of using the technology to give us more effective in our design.
Yeah.
I mean, technology in computer applications for design have gone from slide rules to very sophisticated computer programs, finite element analysis. Documentation wise, I've gone from doing drawings on drawing boards with guys drafting and scratching ink off vellum, through to now we're building collaborated 3D models, complete models in BIM.
Yeah.
Of everything in there. So the building is virtually being constructed prior. And this is very powerful for clients to see how things fit together. It's quite interesting to see that adaptation and see the benefit of it. Also, which I think is very important, is the industry in engineering has changed. I think I'd like to say it's matured a bit, because we've become more diverse in the people that work in engineering in Australia, that is.
Yeah.
And I think very important, we've had, I did my course at university, and I think there was 2 women in the whole engineering school, civil engineering school. That's changed. We in Australia now have a much more diverse group of people, engineers from all over the world. Now we, in this office we have Irish, we have people from India, we have China, and we wouldn't have seen that 10, 15 years ago. It's sort of like all white male, and that brings in, when you bring diversity into an office, it brings different ideas and different working environment, which is good and positive for the industry. So they're the big things I see change, and I think they've been positive. I think the technology is just improved our tools no end. It means we can do more, and the pace has changed. As a result, the pace of work has increased probably 100 times. But I wouldn't underestimate the diversity, because that has been, I've seen such dramatic change, and in the mixture of the whole industry, that is, and we see it in the students as well.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, and I want to see that happen, because continue to happen, because it's good for the industry, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good thing to hear. And then just as a final question before I hand over to Sophia, where do you feel the future of the industry is heading, and how should upcoming engineers adapt to this?
It's an interesting question again, and the industry, there's good things and there's some things I'd like to see improve. And the one thing that concerns me, and I'll hand this over to you younger guys, because I've got less years left, but I think engineers in general have lost their status in society. Now, that is not good for the profession, because it means we have trouble attracting good people to engineering. Yeah. And when you think about it, the contributions that engineers make to society is grossly undervalued. I mean, everything we do adds value. It either adds value to our clients because we create something. We also help and support society. The difficulty for the challenge for engineers, because it's done so well and almost automatically, it's taken for granted. So people don't see what we do. It's, you know, we drive around, our stuff turns up. Everything we do has been touched by engineering. I don't think it's been well recognised that the only people who can be to blame for that is the engineers themselves. So I'd like to see an improvement in how what we do is communicated to the society as a whole. It's quite an interesting challenge. There's a book around, it's called The Existential Pleasures of Engineering. It's probably worth a read. It's a bit nutty. It carries on. The last chapter goes off in a bit strange path, but you should actually try to grab it and read it, because it discusses this problem. And it was written quite a few years ago, but it's a problem that exists. And I see that as an important challenge, and for your generation to see if you can lift us up a bit more and put us, we're more important than real estate agents and even doctors, because people take us for granted, but we've accepted that for too long. It's time to the great leap forward in society is due to the work we do, and don't forget that. It's very important.
Well, we'll try our best. That concludes the interview part of this talk. So I'll hand you over to Sophia now to start the Q&A. Thank you so much, Grant. And yeah, Sophia.
Thank you so much for that, Grant. You made some really, really awesome insights that I honestly did not know much about. In particular, the fact that double degrees are quite attractive on a resume is very reassuring for me, because I'm also a double degree student. So when you said that, I was like, yes, fantastic. We've had a wide variety of questions from both the chat and the Google Forms. The first one I'm going to ask is from the Google form, and it's, have you seen any changes in the nature of client interactions and professional expectations over the course of your role?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we certainly have, and it's almost gone full cycle, but clients would be more engaged and hands-on these days. I think they're more interested. Again, there's a few things that go on, and but it's about getting actively involved in communicating what the requirement is. So from us point of view, we're not sort of just working in a little silo by ourselves. We need to be more in contact with the client so we can understand their requirements. And clients want to spend more time in understanding and checking what we're giving them. For example, I just left a meeting before this which is good, where we were sitting with the client and we had an active page turn of the documents we've produced, so they can look through and see what they're getting before it's built. And so the engagement level has increased quite a bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously I think the way that society has changed has probably influenced that a lot as well, I can imagine.
It's interesting because society has very high expectations, and like in civil and structural engineering, people don't expect things to fall down generally at a society level. They don't want it, for example, they don't like it when a flood comes and washes away their house. Now, to look at the engagement at that level, at society level, there probably isn't enough engagement, because I might just touch on this point because it's important. At a society level, and it sort of links to what I said earlier about being taken for granted. When we design, and it's probably not, this is not discussed so much in university, but we're targeting a certain reliability, and we call it structural reliability, which is really about what's the probability of something falling down due to some reason, and that reason being a combination of mistakes made in design or construction or overloading in use. So we say, well, we think we can only design to a certain level, and that level is set by codes. Now, when things do collapse, and let's look at, or even partially collapse, let's look at Opal Tower, for example. Look at the uproar that occurs. So people think that that shouldn't happen, but we always design that the level of design is such that it will happen. It really is, how often should it happen? It's a society decision, but these decisions are made mysteriously by code committees, and then we design, and always there's going to be something that fails. A plane will crash. Boeing makes 737s and they bugger up their software, plane goes in the ocean. 300 people die. There's a major drama. But as a result, there's a lot of learning from that, and design and engineering improves. So this link is quite tricky and tenuous. It's very nuanced. You talk about aviation industry. The biggest learning in aviation was due to planes crashing. Bridge design, lots of bridges fell down before we knew what we were doing wrong, and people die as a result of that. So we just got to bear in mind when we do design that people's life are also influenced, and society expectations. Then people think of all the things that go wrong, they don't think of all the things that are good.
Definitely a really interesting point, especially, I don't know, I'm doing concrete this sem, so we study a lot on the AS 3600 and codes. There's actually another question that was asked in the chat earlier that kind of builds on this point from Elio, and they said, when working in design, what kind of liability does your company face? So if something goes wrong, does your company have to front the cost or the responsibility, or how does it work?
Well, if you make a mistake and it goes wrong and it ends up a mess, you're responsible for it. And that's one thing we can't get away from. And one thing we do need to realise is that we will make a mistake, and because that's just human nature. What we do in design, you do everything possible along the way to check through a process of checking, and one person will design, another person will check, the drawing is drawn, it's checked. But of course, things can go wrong. And when they do, you have to put your hand up and say, sorry, I stuffed up, and we pay for it. And we have in place professional indemnity insurance, which helps cover the cost of that. Hopefully you don't need to use it, but I've made mistakes where things have gone wrong. Hopefully a lot of them are just, if they're minor, they cost a bit of money, it can be fixed up. You don't want to make a big mistake where you make a drastic mistake where people can be injured. So it's a bit of a challenge that we have to have in our back of our mind what we're doing all the time. And that's why in design, any design office must have a process of checking, because people make mistakes. We all do.
Definitely. And I think as civil engineers, as you go through your degree, like, you sort of realize about, if you make a mistake, often the weight of that is very, very big compared to, say, if you stuff up in a maths degree where the consequences, maybe you get a lower exam mark.
Yeah.
That's another question we had is from Zoe Davis, and she's basically asked, hi Grant, what does a typical day in the life at your office look like?
I'm hard to say what a typical day is, but they can be quite chaotic. And I look at the guys, and my day tends to be quite disorganized. I start off with a plan, but it never seems to follow that plan. And that's probably part of the life of an engineer, is that things can change quite quickly. And again, in the consulting office, but hopefully, if you look generally, we might. It's an office environment. We come to work. We do our design work, but and we document. We're engaging with the client. We're talking to a lot of communication There's the design, sitting down, doing calculations, and working with the team and getting the documentation out. But the challenge that makes it a little bit more interesting is the interruptions that occur all the time, because you'd be working away on a project, and this project be a new project, but the last one you did is being constructed. Invariably, you will get phone calls from someone on site: we don't understand this, can we change that? And so you'll be diverted off. So it's not no days normal, because you'll come in, start doing it, someone will ring you up, you'll need to do this for an hour, then go back to where you started. So it's a lot of chopping and changing as well. No typical day.
I suppose that's true. I think, obviously, I think a lot of people's perception of what an engineering job is like in university is completely changed once they get to an actual industry as well. So I suppose there's not really any, like you said, there's no such thing as a typical day.
But that's good fun, though. The thing
Yeah.
I'm glad is I've been doing this a long time now, and I have to say it's always been enjoyable. Each project, the good thing about engineering and what we do is that each project is new. So you might be coming to the office and designing, but each project is different. It's new, it's something, different challenges, different people in the team, different architect, different project manager, different client. So a whole group of different people, different problem, different site. So this provides a lot of variety, and above all, it can be fun, and you've got to make it fun, because otherwise you just get bored and not interested in it. So you meet different people, there's different personalities. These things are all part of the life of engineering. And you can make it a lot of fun by doing that. You can make good friends out of that as well, which is good for you. And I think that variety by the changing projects, and as a young engineer, you can work anywhere really, overseas. Like I've been all over the place working. I've worked for the same business, my business, but I've worked all over China. I mean, who would have thought? I never thought that I would be in the middle of Western China, running around looking at multi-level warehousing, and then flying around on numerous occasions. Go to Europe, in the middle of Germany and Norway. Just in the last, before COVID, in 12 months, these things can happen. And if they only happen for what you do yourself, but the engineering does provide that opportunity.
That's very, very fascinating. And this last question is actually kind of touching on what you just said, and it's a bit of a personal interest. In terms of traveling for your job, could you describe what it's like? Where have you been? Some of your experiences or highlights as like traveling across the world?
Well, like I said, the highlights of the travel, I think, was a big eye-opener for me, was working on projects with clients in China, because China has been, it's a lot going on, and seeing things that are done the same and seeing how things are done differently, and the scale of it. And the scale of it is probably immense. I mean, we do things in Australia which we think are big, but they'll do them over there 10 times the size. And then you've got different workforce and different people. And but the base of the engineering is much the same, of course. Engineering, law, physics applies everywhere. I've very much enjoyed the opportunity of working with clients in China and Asia. And and also just dealing with the increasing automation, which is mainly coming out of Europe with the Netherlands and Germany. It's quite interesting to go and meet those people, and the precision and the approach of the Germans in particular, Austrians, and quite exciting. Again, it's good and travel's always good, because you fly around, get out, and then normally because you're out some different country, they want to take you out, and you've got to try to balance working all day, and then they want you out drinking all night, which can be hard work. You get back on the plane and you sleep. but I would never expected that at the start of my career, but as it turns out, with the type of work we do, that's come automatic with it. It's hard work, but it's also, again, makes it fun, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting that I think one job can take you to so many places and just get you meeting so many people. I personally think that's really, really exciting. Thank you so much for answering everyone's questions. I'm going to hand it over to Olivia now, who's going to wrap up.
All right, thanks, Sophia. I'll just get everyone to turn their camera on real quick so we can take some screenshots for social media. All right, perfect. Thanks, everyone. Cool. Thank you. So thanks, Grant, for coming. Really appreciate your time. And if we'll just make sure everyone's filled out the attendance form. And then, yeah, you should be good to go. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I hope